I knew HOA boards could be bold, but nothing prepared me for the morning. I walked out to my ranch and found a massive sewage pipeline stretching straight across my pasture like it owned the place. Fresh trenches, broken fence posts, tire tracks from heavy machinery. My land looked like someone had tried to perform surgery on it with a chainsaw. And then I saw the sign, a crooked plywood board, spray-painted with the words, HOA Sewer Project, Do Not Touch. I genuinely thought it was a prank until she stepped out from behind a construction truck. Karen, the self-crowned queen of the HOA, pink blazer, sunglasses, clipboard, and the confidence of someone who thinks gravity itself needs her permission to work. She pointed at the trench and announced, "We're installing sewer lines through your ranch. It's for the community. You can't stop us." Little did she know, I'm not just a rancher. I'm the director of the EPA, and she had just committed the environmental equivalent of punching a hornet's nest. Before we dive in, comment your location and local time below, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the chaos that follows. I wish I could tell you that what happened next was a misunderstanding, some mix-up with property maps or a delivery truck that made a wrong turn. But no, Karen didn't do misunderstandings. She did declarations. And that morning, she declared war on my land with the confidence of a woman who'd never once been told no in her entire life. She planted her heels into my soil as if she'd grown roots there, and pointed at the massive trench slicing across my ranch. "We're expanding the HOA's infrastructure," she said, every syllable dripping with authority she absolutely did not have. "These lines are part of the new neighborhood sewer upgrade. The community voted unanimously. This route is approved." I stared at her, then at the trench, then back at her. "Karen," I said slowly, "this is private property." She didn't even blink. "It's community property now." "Since when?" "Since I decided it should be." That right there, that tone, that posture, that deranged sense of entitlement could bring down governments if left unchecked. Karen wasn't just confident, she had the kind of confidence you normally only see in toddlers or dictatorships. Behind her stood two HOA board members, both with clipboards, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere but stuck between Karen and a man whose ranch they had just mutilated. One was sweating through his shirt, the other kept adjusting her glasses, like clearer vision might make the situation less insane. I walked toward the trench, my boots sinking into the freshly torn earth. The workers, 3 guys in neon vests, stiffened as I approached. They weren't villains, just men hired to do a job, and they clearly had no idea they were standing on a legal landmine. "Morning," I said. One of the workers opened his mouth, but Karen snapped her fingers at him like he was some kind of misbehaving puppy. "Do not talk to him," she hissed. "He's trespassing on our construction site." I blinked. "Karen, this entire site is my land?" She snapped her head toward me with a smile so forced it could have cracked her face. "Not anymore. You see, the HOA unanimously approved an emergency easement. It's binding." I raised an eyebrow. "By unanimous, you mean you, and you, too?" I nodded at her clipboard carrying sidekicks. The one on the left coughed. "Well, technically." Karen stomped her heel into the dirt loud enough to cut him off. "Yes, unanimous." I could feel a headache forming, the kind where you just know you're about to spend the next several weeks untangling someone else's stupidity from your life. I crossed my arms, stared her down, and asked, "Show me the documents." "What documents?" "The easement papers, county approval, environmental review, routing plans, permits, anything." Karen waved her hand dismissively, like I was requesting something trivial, like a cup of sugar. "We don't need all that. The HOA has its own internal approval process, much faster, much more efficient. That's not how federal or state law works. Well, it's how our community works." And there it was, the HOA motto, apparently. I crouched beside the trench. The pipe they were lowering was huge, 3 feet across, industrial grade, meant for major sewage flow, and these idiots were planning to run it through my ranch like it was a nature trail. Worse, a faint odor wafted up from one of the older pipes in the truck, something sour and chemical. I didn't like that one bit. I climbed out and started snapping pictures. The machinery, the workers, the trench, the pipes, the sign, the broken fence line, the tire tracks, even Karen's face when she realized she couldn't stop me. "What do you think you're doing?" she barked. "Documenting? For what?" "You'll find out." She stepped forward, getting inches from my face. Are you trying to threaten me? No, I said calmly. Just collecting evidence. Her eyes narrowed. Evidence of what? We're within our rights. Karen, you can't create your own rights. She crossed her arms, chin raised. I'm the HOA president. I create what's necessary for the community. The woman behind her nodded nervously. It's true, Karen whipped around. Stop talking. This was like watching a bad reality show unfold. Except it was happening on my land, and I was the poor soul stuck as the unwilling protagonist. I took a breath and asked the workers, gently, do you guys have a permit for this job? Any paperwork? They froze. Karen nearly exploded. They don't answer to you. That wasn't my question. The oldest worker finally spoke, voice low. Ma'am, we were told the HOA owns this land. I closed my eyes for a moment. There it was. The lie. The foundation of all HOA tyranny. Misinformation delivered confidently. I pulled up the county's digital parcel map on my phone, turned it toward them, and showed the bright green outline of my property, my name, bold as day, right across the screen. This, I said, is the land you're standing on, and I'm its owner. All three workers went pale. Karen lunged forward and slapped the phone out of my hand. It hit the dirt with a dull thud. That's fake, she snapped. County records are not fake. She pointed at me like an emperor sentencing someone to be executed. If you interfere again, I'll call the police. For trespassing on my own ranch, for obstructing an HOA project. I picked up my phone, brushed off the dirt, and looked her dead in the eye. Karen, you're digging a sewer trench across federal protected land without a permit. You don't realize the hole you're digging for yourself. You can't intimidate me, she spat. I know my rights, and I know yours don't matter on HOA territory. I let out the softest laugh. HOA territory, she smirked. Everything within 1 mile of our neighborhood falls under HOA influence. That might have been the craziest sentence I'd ever heard from an adult. And keep in mind I work in government. I've heard insane things. I stepped back, looking over the damage, broken irrigation, destroyed fencing, soil displacement, potential contamination from improperly stored sewer materials. Karen had no idea the avalanche she'd just triggered. Karen, this stops today, I said. No, she said confidently. It starts today. She turned to the workers. Keep digging. Ignore him. He's nobody. Nobody. I almost smiled. If only she knew. I walked back toward my truck, pulling out my phone again, not to call the sheriff, not to call a lawyer, to call my agency, but Karen didn't need to know that yet. Behind me, I heard her shouting orders, the trench widening, machinery groaning, metal scraping. Every sound was another nail in her coffin. Because Karen had just committed federal environmental violations on a scale she couldn't even spell, and soon she was going to learn exactly who nobody really was. If Karen's little trench stunt felt like a punch to the gut, what happened the next morning was a full-blown freight train collision delivered directly to my sanity. The sun wasn't even fully up yet. When the ground started shaking, rumbling so hard, my bedroom windows rattled. I shot awake thinking we were having an earthquake. But no, it was much worse. I stepped out onto my porch and froze. Karen had doubled down. Instead of 3 construction workers and a few sewer pipes, my ranch had become a full construction zone. I'm talking bulldozers, excavators, dump trucks, concrete mixers, and a crew of at least 15 guys tearing into my property like they were building a 6-lane interstate. A bright orange temporary fence had been set up on my soil with a sign zip-tied to the front that read, HOA Sewer Expansion. Authorized personnel only. Authorized personnel, on land I paid for, maintained, and lived on. Karen was standing proudly in the middle of the chaos, wearing a neon vest, 3 sizes too small, and a white hard hat she must have bought from a Halloween store. She paced back and forth, barking orders like a general preparing for battle. I walked toward the mess, anger rising with every step. Broken fence posts lay scattered like bones. Deep trenches cut across my pasture, some so wide they looked like miniature canyons. My irrigation system, a network that took months to install, had been ripped apart like it was made of spaghetti. I spotted a worker pulling up one of my water lines with a backhoe and yelled, "Hey, stop!" The backhoe operator looked confused, slowing down, unsure if he should listen to me. Karen sprinted across the site, waving her clipboard like she was trying to swat a fly. "Don't stop, keep going. Ignore that man, he's interfering with HOA business. I climbed up onto the track of the backhoe and knocked on the glass. The operator rolled the window down hesitantly. Sir, he said nervously, we were told this is community property. It's not, I snapped. This is private land. You are trespassing. Before he could reply, Karen jammed herself between us and shouted, Get off the equipment. You're violating site safety regulations. I stared at her, incredulous. Karen, you don't even have site safety regulations. I do now, she declared, thrusting her clipboard inches from my face. It was blank. The backhoe operator looked between us, visibly uncomfortable. Ma'am, I don't want to get in trouble. Karen spun toward him. If you stop working, you're fired. I'll replace your company with someone competent. The operator swallowed hard and continued. I took a deep breath and looked around the disaster zone again. Dirt piled high, deep ditches zigzagging across the pasture, workers dragging more massive sewer pipes into position. And the worst part, I could smell it faint but unmistakable, the sour, chemical tang of improperly handled wastewater. My stomach dropped. They'd ruptured something. I saw a muddy puddle pooling near a trench, slightly cloudy, carrying an oily sheen. A worker stepped around it like he knew it wasn't normal. I marched toward Karen. Where is this wastewater coming from? She rolled her eyes. We rerouted part of the sewer flow temporarily. Onto my land. It's just water. That's not water, Karen. She gave me a smug smile. Well, if you're so worried, maybe you shouldn't have bought a ranch so close to an HOA. My voice dropped dangerously low. Karen, you're causing an environmental hazard. You're exaggerating. You're dumping untreated sewage. She dismissed me with a laugh. Oh, please. If there was a real environmental issue, someone from the EPA would be here. That one almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started photographing everything. The ruptured flow, the muddy runoff heading toward my irrigation canal, the equipment digging dangerously close to a small creek that fed half my pasture. Karen stalked over. Stop documenting. No. Why not? Because this is all evidence. Her face twisted. Evidence of what? Doing my job? Of violating at least half a dozen state and federal regulations? Some of the workers stopped what they were doing and looked at her nervously. She forced out a laugh and shouted, Ignore him. He's bluffing. He's nobody. Nobody. There it was again. The excavator behind us lurched forward, tearing another chunk of earth away. The operator seemed hesitant, but Karen kept waving her arms, directing him as if she actually had any idea what she was doing. Then came the breaking point, the moment that pushed everything over the edge. The excavator's bucket smashed into an underground pipe they hadn't mapped, bursting it open. A foul spray of brownish water erupted, splashing across the trench and flowing downhill in a steady stream. Workers jumped back, gagging. I could practically feel my blood pressure spike. I turned to Karen. You just ruptured a wastewater main? She tried to wave the smell away with her hand. It's fine. It's natural. Karen, nothing that smells like that is natural. It'll evaporate. It'll contaminate my soil. It's fertilizer. I stared at her, stunned. Did you just call raw sewage fertilizer? She crossed her arms triumphantly. It's organic. You have absolutely no idea how anything works. She snapped back. I don't need to. I have people for that. You mean the people who lied to you about who owns this land? She faltered for half a second, just long enough to betray the first crack in her confidence. Then she rallied. This is happening whether you like it or not, the HOA voted. The community deserves proper sewage handling, and your ranch is the best route. According to who? Me. It was like arguing with a brick wall that had taken a seminar on narcissism. A construction foreman finally stepped forward, wiping sweat from his brow. Ma'am, this really doesn't look legal. We don't have permits. We don't have inspection clearance. We don't... Karen cut him off. I said, keep working. But if you stop, I'll report your company for breach of contract. He stared at her. We don't have a contract. She blinked, taken aback for a moment. Well, you should. I emailed one. That counts. The foreman pinched the bridge of his nose. That's not how contracts work. Karen pointed at him like a cartoon villain. You're lying to sabotage me. I stepped between them. Karen, this project ends now. She threw her head back and laughed. You can't end it. I smiled faintly. I already have. Excuse me. I called someone who does have authority. They'll be here today. She scoffed. The county, Please, I'll handle them. No, I said. Not the county? She squinted. Who, then? You'll see. She rolled her eyes dramatically. I'm not scared of whatever little friend you called. I shrugged. You should be. Because by this point, my team had already received my message. And when a call comes from the director of the EPA, things move fast. I looked across my torn-apart ranch, the workers who clearly wanted to leave, the construction vehicles idling like beasts waiting to be put down, the sewage leaking into the earth. And then at Karen, standing there so sure she was untouchable. She had no idea what was coming, but she would. Soon, very soon, by noon, the chaos on my ranch had reached a level I didn't think possible outside a disaster movie. Karen's construction circus was still in full swing, engines roaring, mud flying, workers shouting over each other, and the smell of ruptured wastewater thick enough to make a grown man cry. Karen marched around the site like the self-appointed empress of sewage, barking orders, threatening workers, and insisting everything was going according to plan. She had absolutely no clue that her plan was minutes away from collapsing like a sandcastle in a hurricane. I noticed them before anyone else did. A convoy of 3 white government SUVs approaching from the road, tires crunching over the gravel, sunlight glinting off the United States Environmental Protection Agency decals. My team, the cavalry, the people Karen thought would never be involved in something so small, if only she knew how big this was about to become. The SUVs rolled to a stop at the edge of the pasture. Doors opened, 4 specialists stepped out, wearing navy blue EPA jackets, gloves, boots, and carrying equipment cases. These weren't office desk analysts. These were field investigators, the kind who respond to chemical spills, hazardous waste leaks, and illegal dumping sites. Karen took one look at them and made the worst mistake she'd made all day. She marched toward them. "Excuse me," she shouted, waving her clipboard like it was a divine weapon. "This is a restricted HOA project site. You people can't be here." One of the investigators, a tall woman named Rivera, paused mid-step and stared at Karen like she was a lab specimen that wasn't acting according to expected behavior. "Ma'am," she said calmly, "we received an environmental hazard report for this location. We're here to assess." Karen scoffed loudly. "Environmental hazard? Please. This is a community improvement project." Rivera glanced at the muddy trench, the workers wading through contaminated runoff, and the ruptured wastewater pipe still spilling into my pasture. "It looks like more than that." Karen held up her hand like she was about to issue a royal decree. "No. I already told the man who lives here he doesn't have authority to call anyone. This land is part of the HOA sewer expansion. Your presence is unnecessary." I stepped forward, leaning against a fence post that was barely standing. "Karen, they're here because I requested an investigation." She whirled around, eyes blazing. You did this." I nodded. "Yes, and they have full federal jurisdiction." "No, they don't," she screamed. "HOA rules override everything within our boundaries." One of the investigators raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, that is not how the government works." Karen's face turned a shade of red I had only seen on malfunctioning microwaves. "This is harassment. Get off of HOA land immediately, or I'll call the sheriff." Rivera calmly pointed to her badge. "We outrank the sheriff on environmental violations." Karen blinked rapidly, clearly unable to compute the concept of someone having more power than she did. No, this is insane. You cannot just walk in here and investigate without my permission." Meanwhile, the other investigators got to work. One took soil samples from the contaminated puddle, another collected water in clear vials, holding them up to the sunlight, watching the murky liquid swirl with visible particles. A third walked along the trench, measuring pipe diameters, noting the haphazard installation, and shaking his head like he was watching someone assemble a bomb wrong. The more they examined, the angrier they got, and the more furious Karen became. She ran after one of them, waving her arms wildly. "Stop touching that, that's HOA property. You can't just take samples." The investigator didn't even glance at her as he sealed a vial. "Ma'am, the presence of wastewater in open soil constitutes a potential violation of both state and federal statutes. We're obligated to document it." Karen stomped her foot. Actually stomped it. "I didn't give you permission," Rivera answered. "You don't have the authority to deny us access. This is my project," Karen yelled. I couldn't resist. "Karen, you don't even have a permit." "Yes, I do. Show it." She froze. completely froze, clipboard trembling in her hands. The investigators turned toward her like sharks, sensing blood in the water. Rivera asked, "You have a construction and wastewater routing permit." Karen opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, then muttered something that sounded like, "We voted internally." The investigator nearest her straightened. "Ma'am, any excavation involving sewage lines requires a county-approved construction permit, an environmental impact assessment, a wastewater handling authorization, a routing approval from the Department of Public Works." Karen's face twitched with each number. He continued, "Do you have any of those?" Karen shook her head stubbornly. "We don't need them. We are the HOA. We govern ourselves." Rivera exchanged a look with her team, the kind of silent communication that says, "We've got a live one here." She pulled out her notebook and spoke firmly. "Ma'am, at this time, we are issuing a temporary cease work order on this location pending review." Karen gasped like she'd been stabbed. "You can't stop my project." Rivera tore the yellow order slip and handed it to her. "We just did." Karen ripped it in half and threw the pieces into the mud. The investigators stared at her. Rivera's voice dropped dangerously calm. "Ma'am, destroying a federal order is a felony." Karen froze mid-tantrum. The foreman of the construction crew, overhearing everything, approached cautiously. Ma'am, I think our company needs to pull out. We can't risk the fines." Karen spun around. "No one leaves. We finish this pipe today." Rivera stepped between them. "Sir, for your own protection, shut down all work immediately." The foreman nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." He turned to his crew and shouted, "Shut it down, pack up everything." The relief on the workers' faces was instant. Engines went quiet, tools were dropped, pipes were left half-lowered. The workers practically sprinted to collect their gear. Karen had a full meltdown. She ran after them. "Get back here. You're fired if you leave." The foreman shrugged. "We can't be fired from a job we were never legally hired for." The chaos settled into uneasy silence as the EPA team finished gathering evidence. Karen, defeated for the moment but still simmering with rage, stormed over to me. "This isn't over," she hissed. I smiled. "You're right, it's not." She jabbed her finger toward my chest. "I will take this to the HOA board. I will make them vote to press charges against you." "For what?" I asked. "For obstruction, sabotage, harassment, environmental interference." I blinked. "Environmental interference. Yes," she shouted. "You interfered with my sewer lines." I didn't even respond. There was no point. Arguing with Karen felt like trying to convince a tornado to take a day off. The investigators finished their rounds, then approached me. Rivera nodded respectfully. "We found multiple violations. We'll file an emergency report with the regional office. Depending on test results, this could escalate to a federal enforcement case." Karen overheard and began screaming, "This is a personal attack. You're all in collusion with him." One of the investigators asked me quietly, "Does she know who you are?" I smirked. "Not yet." Rivera raised an eyebrow. "Should we tell her?" "Not today," I said. "She'll find out soon enough." And she would. Soon. Because the next move wasn't theirs, it was mine. I honestly thought the sight of EPA investigators shutting down her illegal sewer circus would be enough to make Karen back off, for at least a day, maybe two. But I underestimated something crucial. Karen's delusion didn't have a brake pedal. If anything, the cease work order only poured gasoline on her fiery little ego. By early evening, the same day, after the EPA team had left and the last construction truck rumbled off my land, I spotted something strange happening down the road. A group of cars, sedans, SUVs. Even a golf cart started gathering at the HOA clubhouse. People in pastel-colored clothes trickled inside, clutching clipboards, binders, and those obnoxious little HOA rule books that looked like they'd been written by dictators with too much free time. I didn't need a memo to know what was coming. Karen was calling an emergency HOA meeting to complain about me, on my own land, to people who had absolutely no jurisdiction. Still, I decided to go. I wanted to hear the nonsense for myself. And more importantly, I wanted the timing to be perfect for what I was about to reveal. The clubhouse was buzzing by the time I walked in. Residents were whispering, gasping dramatically, pointing at me like I had marched in carrying toxic waste on my back. Karen stood at the front like a preacher ready to deliver a sermon, tapping the microphone until it screeched with feedback. "There he is," she shrilled the moment I stepped through the door. The man who attacked our community today. I gave a polite nod. Evening, everyone. Karen slammed her palm onto the podium. Don't evening us. You brought federal agents onto HOA land. You sabotaged our sewer project. You endangered our workers. I raised an eyebrow. I didn't realize pumping untreated sewage into someone's ranch counted as community development. Gasps echoed around the room like we were filming a soap opera. One elderly man clutched his wife's arm and whispered, "Did he say sewage?" Karen shot him a death glare. "It was clean water. It was brown," I replied. "It was natural," she snapped. "It smelled like a crime scene." More gasps. Karen threw her hands up. "Ladies and gentlemen, this man has been harassing the HOA since day one. He is refusing to cooperate with the community. He obstructed our essential infrastructure project and lied to federal agents." I held up a hand. "Actually, they're my employees." Karen froze just for a split second, but it was enough to see confusion flicker across her face. "Your employees?" she repeated, as if the words didn't compute. Someone in the back raised a hand timidly. "Are you a contractor or something?" Karen answered for me. "No, he's unemployed. He's a rancher. He probably watches YouTube all day." I sighed. "Karen, do you really not know?" "Know what?" she barked. A few residents leaned forward, curious. Others looked back and forth between us like spectators waiting for a boxing match to start. "All right," I said quietly, stepping toward the front. "You want transparency? Let's do transparency." I reached into my jacket and pulled out my badge holder. For a moment the room held its breath. I flipped it open. The gold badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The words at the top were unmistakable. United States Environmental Protection Agency. Director. Not agent, not investigator, director. The room exploded, not literally. Though Karen looked like she might combust, people gasped so loudly the windows rattled. A woman in the front row jolted to her feet, slapped her husband's chest, and hissed, "I told you he wasn't normal." Another man dropped his pen. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, we're going to federal prison." And Karen did not gasp. She did not faint. She did not scream. She laughed, a loud, hysterical, unhinged laugh that made even her own board members inch away. "No." She spat between cackles. "No, this is fake. You printed that. You made that badge on Etsy." I calmly extended the badge so she could read the fine print. She leaned in, squinted, and then recoiled like she'd touched a hot stove. One of her board members, trembling, whispered, "Karen, that's a real badge." She whipped around. "No, it isn't." I cleared my throat. "Karen, the EPA reports directly to Congress. My signature is on half the environmental regulations enforced in this region." The older man who'd asked about sewage raised his hand. "So, when we were dumping the storm drain, overflow into the retention pond without a permit," Karen slammed her hand on the podium. "Don't say another word." The room erupted into panicked whispers. I let them go for a moment before lifting my voice. "I'm here tonight for one reason," I said calmly. "To explain exactly what violations occurred today," Karen snorted. "Violations? Please. Our project was perfectly legal." "Really?" I asked. "Because you excavated on private property without permission, you installed sewage infrastructure without a state permit, you rerouted contaminated wastewater into open soil, you exposed workers to biological hazards, and you attempted to block a federal investigation." A woman gasped. "Karen, what did you do?" Karen pointed at me with a trembling finger. "He's lying. He made all of that up to destroy the HOA." I shook my head. "Karen, there are soil samples, water samples, drone photos, field logs, and 3 hours of evidence gathered by my team." Her face went sheet white. Someone in the back yelled, "She's going to bankrupt all of us." Another added, "I told you not to vote her in." A third shouted, "We're going to be on the news." Karen tried to regain control, banging the podium like a malfunctioning robot. "Stop panicking. I am still president of this HOA, and I will defend our rights." I stepped forward, voice level. "Actually, as of 10 minutes ago, the regional EPA office issued a temporary injunction against all HOA-led construction projects pending investigation." Karen's jaw dropped. "You can't do that." "I can," I said. "And I did." A man in the second row muttered, "We're doomed." I let silence settle before finishing. "Here are your options. 1. You shut down the project, restore the damage to my land, pay the fines, and cooperate fully. 2. You refuse and face federal prosecution. A woman grabbed her purse as if preparing to flee the country. Karen, choose option 1. Choose option 1, right now. Karen shook her head violently. No, we fight. Half the room groaned. Another person stood. I motioned to remove Karen as HOA president effective immediately. Seconded, someone shouted. Thirded, fourthed. Someone slammed a notebook onto the table. 59th, Karen went feral. You can't remove me. I am the OA. It's a vote, I reminded her, and the vote looks unanimous. Just like she liked to say. The board huddled, murmured, scribbled a few signatures, and then turned back to the crowd. Effective immediately, one of them announced nervously. Karen is hereby relieved of her duties as president. Karen screamed an actual, primal scream and lunged toward me like she wanted to claw the badge off my chest. 2 residents grabbed her arms. She kicked, thrashed, and shouted accusations about conspiracies, corruption, witch hunts, and ungrateful peasants. They escorted her out the door as she shrieked, "This isn't over. I'll sue all of you. The HOA will rise again." The door slammed behind her. Silence. Every face in the room slowly turned toward me, terrified and grateful at the same time. One resident whispered, "Please don't let her come back." Another asked softly, "Are we in trouble?" I sighed, "Not if you cooperate, but the investigation is far from over." Karen had been dethroned, but her sewage disaster? Oh, that was just getting started. The morning after Karen's spectacular implosion at the HOA meeting, I walked out onto my porch with a cup of black coffee and the kind of calm satisfaction a man only gets after watching a tyrant dethroned in real time. But as much as I would have loved to believe the hard part was over, I knew better. Removing Karen from her little plastic throne was only step 1. The actual investigation, the real fallout, was just beginning, and the universe wasted no time reminding me of that. 3 more EPA vehicles, 2 state environmental trucks, and a county inspector's van rolled down my driveway like a convoy heading into battle. These weren't the field agents from before. These were the heavy hitters: soil contamination specialists, hydrology analysts, environmental lawyers. The kind of people whose report summaries could shake entire city councils. They filed out, nodding to me with familiar professionalism. "Morning, Director," one said. "Ready for round 2. I sipped my coffee. Born ready. The team began spreading out across the property, marking areas with flags, setting up testing stations, and measuring runoff paths. I followed them down toward the trenches Karen had carved into my ranch, now quiet, except for a few birds picking at the muddy ruins. When the investigators reached the puddles created by the ruptured wastewater line, the lead hydrologist crouched down, scooped a vial of the murky liquid, and frowned immediately. "Jesus. This isn't just residential wastewater?" I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He sniffed the sample, swirled it, and stood up fast. "There's industrial residue in this, detergents, oils, suspended solids. The HOA system might have been illegally dumping mixed waste for a while. That was worse than I expected, and I expected bad." Behind us, another specialist shouted from across the field, "We have soil infiltration," a third added. "Groundwater contamination possible." I let out a long breath. Karen hadn't just illegally dug through my land, she had managed to create a multi-layer environmental nightmare. I spotted the county inspector stepping over the churned-up soil. Looking increasingly horrified with every trench he passed, he kept mumbling, "Oh, this is bad, this is real bad." One of my specialists approached him. "Did the HOA file any permits with your office?" The inspector shook his head vigorously. "No, zero, nothing. We didn't even know this project existed." The specialist scribbled notes. "Then we're adding unauthorized infrastructure construction to the violation list." The inspector nearly choked. "They built sewer lines on private land without notifying anyone." "Welcome to the Karen experience," I said, while the team spread out, documenting every inch of damage. I noticed something else, a series of pipes leading away from the trench, up toward the hill near the HOA border. I hadn't explored that direction yet, so I motioned a few specialists to follow and trudged up the slope. What we found made every investigator stop dead. There was a giant concrete drainage basin, half-finished, unstable, and positioned at an angle that could collapse with one strong rainstorm. The basin connected to the illegal pipes on my land, but also another pipe system branching toward the neighborhood's storm drains, and at the edge of the basin were several plastic containers, industrial-sized jugs with faded warning labels. I felt my stomach drop. One of my analysts crouched to inspect the containers. He wiped a gloved hand over the label and read aloud, "Non-commercial grease trap discharge. Hazardous if improperly disposed." Another specialist cursed under their breath. I knew it. Someone's been using the sewer system as a dumping point. The color drained from the county inspector's face. If the HOA's been disposing grease trap waste into residential lines, that's illegal on multiple levels. I rubbed my forehead, exhaling deeply. Karen's little dream project wasn't just unlawful, it was outright dangerous. The specialists immediately began photographing everything, measuring distances, analyzing gradient slopes. They worked with the intensity of people uncovering a buried time bomb, because that's essentially what Karen had built. An hour into the inspection, Rivera, the lead field agent from the previous day, arrived with a tablet full of newly gathered evidence. "We pulled camera footage from surrounding houses," she said. "Look at this." She tapped the screen. Up popped a video from a neighbor's security cam. Karen standing proudly beside the backhoe, yelling at workers to dig faster, telling them to ignore the whining rancher, and at one point my personal favorite claiming, "I don't care what the law says, this is my project." Another clip showed her talking to a contractor, saying, "Just dump it here. It's not like anyone's drinking this water." Rivera raised an eyebrow. The irony is that her own HOA water supply connects downstream from this. I stared at her, baffled. Wait, she didn't know that. Rivera straightened. Judging by the footage, she has no idea how sewage systems work at all. We kept reviewing evidence texts from HOA board group chats, claiming Karen insists we don't need permits, drone footage from a neighbor showing Karen personally directing excavation, even a voice memo she sent to her board saying, "If anyone asks who approved this, say we did a vote, doesn't matter if we didn't, Maz now." The county inspector looked like he was about to faint. "We've got enough here for civil suits, criminal charges, environmental fines. Good Lord." But the investigation wasn't done. Two of my groundwater experts approached me with somber expressions. "Sir, you need to see this." They led me to a testing rig set up near the small creek on my property. A clear tube siphoned water into a tall glass cylinder. At first it looked fine, just cloudy, then the particles began to separate. Dark flecks, suspended sludge, one specialist said quietly. "This is contamination from the ruptured main." "How far downstream does this creek run?" the other asked. I swallowed. "Through 3 properties, Amati." Meaning Karen's disaster wasn't just on my land, it had spread. A silence fell over the group. Then Rivera broke it. "We'll have to expand the investigation to include downstream sites. This is no longer just a permit issue. This is a contamination event." A nearby resident had apparently been watching from the fence line. Mrs. Hargrove, a perfectly polite woman with a tendency to faint at dramatic moments. She cupped her hands over her mouth. "Is that why my tomatoes died this morning?" The hydrologist nodded. "Very possibly," she gasped, loud enough to echo. "Karen killed my garden." And then she delivered the line of the day. I knew that woman was evil. The specialists kept testing for hours, building an increasingly grim picture of what Karen's arrogance had unleashed. And while they worked, more evidence trickled in, emails from contractors refusing the job because Karen insisted it was secret HOA business, text messages showing she lied about land ownership, even receipts for cheap pipes that weren't rated for sewage at all. It was a perfect storm of incompetence, arrogance, and environmental destruction. As the sun began to dip, Rivera approached me with the thickest tablet report I'd ever seen assembled in one day. "This is enough to trigger federal enforcement," she said. "We're moving forward with a formal violation notice." I nodded. "Good. And there's something else." She handed me her phone. On the screen was a photo, a bill of materials Karen had ordered, for Phase 2. I stared at it. She planned more. Rivera's voice dropped. A lot more. Karen hadn't just wanted a sewer line. She'd planned an entire underground system. All of it illegal. All of it flowing straight through my ranch. I shook my head slowly. She had no idea what she set in motion. Rivera crossed her arms. "She will. Soon. Because in the next phase, the formal violation notice hearing Karen's entire empire was about to crumble, and she wouldn't be able to scream her way out of that room. The hearing was scheduled for 9:00 a.m. sharp. But by the time I arrived at the county administrative building, a crowd had already gathered outside. Homeowners from the HOA milled around nervously, whispering in tight groups, clutching coffee cups like life rafts. Some shot me grateful looks. Others appeared terrified. One man approached and asked, "Sir, is it true the fines could reach 6 figures?" I gave him a sympathetic nod. Possibly. He exhaled so sharply he nearly deflated. "Karen's going to kill us all. She already tried," another muttered. I walked past them, entered the tall glass doors, and headed to the third-floor conference room where the environmental violation hearing was being held. Inside, county officials, state environmental officers, and 2 federal attorneys were already seated. A long table was reserved for my EPA team, while a smaller one was marked HOA Rep. Karen was nowhere to be seen. For one glorious second, I wondered if she'd fled the state. Maybe she'd taken a bus to Mexico and was currently trying to convince customs agents she was the rightful ruler of her neighborhood. But no, at 9:02, the door slammed open like a gunshot, and in she stormed, dressed in a blinding pink power suit, hair teased high enough to interfere with aviation laws, sunglasses perched atop her head like a crown. Behind her stumbled 2 HOA board members who looked like they'd rather crawl into a sewer pipe than be here. Karen slapped a stack of papers onto the HOA table and announced, "Let's get this circus over with." The federal attorney closest to me leaned in and whispered, "Is she always like this?" "Worse," I murmured. The lead county commissioner cleared his throat. "We're here to review environmental violations associated with unauthorized construction on privately owned land, groundwater contamination, improper wastewater rerouting, and obstruction of federal investigation." Karen immediately stood up. "Objection." The commissioner blinked. "This isn't a courtroom, ma'am." "Well, it should be," she snapped. "Because I have been wronged. I am the victim here, and my community has been unfairly targeted." A collective exhale rippled across the room. "This was going to be long," the commissioner continued. "We'll begin with testimony from the Environmental Protection Agency." Karen shot her hand in the air. "No, I demand to speak first." "No," the commissioner said flatly. "Yes." "No." "Yes." The commissioner's voice hardened. "Ma'am, sit down." Karen huffed, dropped into her chair like a petulant teenager, and folded her arms dramatically. Rivera, my lead field agent, stood and began presenting. She laid out the maps, photos, soil sample data, water contamination charts, timestamps, and the security footage of Karen proudly directing the illegal dig. Karen interrupted every 2 minutes. "That's taken out of context. That's fake. Those workers were lazy. That mud was already there. That sewage wasn't sewage, it was natural." The state hydrologist replied dryly. "Raw sewage is never natural." Karen pointed at him. "How would you know? Are you a sewage expert?" "Yes," he said. "I literally am." Her mouth snapped shut for the first time since entering the room. But the worst moment for her wasn't the footage, or the contamination charts, or even the groundwater infiltration maps. It was the audio recording. Rivera pressed play. Karen's voice boomed across the speakers. "Just dig. If anyone complains, say we voted, tell the workers the land is ours, and dump the runoff in that rancher's field, he won't know the difference." The room fell so silent you could hear the air conditioner humming. Karen shot up, face red. "That was a private message." The federal attorney replied. "You sent it to 48 people, and they betrayed me?" The commissioner rubbed his forehead. "Ma'am, everything you've said today confirms the violations." Karen jabbed a finger toward me. "This is his fault. He set me up. He tricked me. He weaponized the EPA." I folded my hands calmly. "Karen, you weaponized your own stupidity." Gasps filled the room. One of the board members stifled a laugh. The other whispered, "Oh my God." Karen lunged toward me so aggressively that a state officer stepped between us. "I will sue you for defamation." "For what?" I asked, accurately describing your actions. She sputtered, sat down, stood up again, sat a second time, then finally spun toward her board members. "Back me up," she demanded. They both stared at the table. "Traitors," she hissed. The commissioner cleared his throat and began reading the formal list of violations page after page of them. Unauthorized excavation, illegal waste disposal, endangerment of groundwater, construction without permits, obstruction of federal work, threatening contractors, destroying a federal order, abuse of HOA authority. Karen tried to object to every point. She failed at all of them. Finally, the commissioner announced, "We will now open the floor to the director of the EPA." The room turned toward me. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and stepped forward. "Thank you. I'll be brief." Karen snorted. "You wouldn't know brief if it bit you, ma'am," the commissioner warned. I continued. "Yesterday, our team found a clear pattern of environmental neglect, disregard for public safety, and intentional deception." Karen laughed. "Alleged." "No," I said, "documented." I lifted a folder thick with evidence. "This contains everything your board members, contractors, and neighbors sent us. Screenshots, messages, footage, statements." One board member whispered, "Sorry, Karen." She spun on him. "You betrayed me too." I held up a hand. The contamination extended beyond my ranch. 3 downstream properties were impacted. One resident's vegetable garden was destroyed. Mrs. Hargrove, sitting in the back, stood abruptly. "My tomatoes. Karen ruined my tomatoes." Karen groaned. "Oh please, they were ugly tomatoes." Mrs. Hargrove fainted. The commissioner sighed. "Somebody help her." A paramedic carried her out while muttering. "I knew this HOA was cursed," I continued. "Based on the evidence, the EPA recommends the following: full restoration of the damaged land, proper disposal of contaminated soil, replacement of irrigation infrastructure, civil penalties on the HOA, individual penalties for the project leader." Karen perked up. "Yes, penalize the HOA, not me," the federal attorney said. "You are the project leader. Thanks for watching." Karen froze so hard she might have turned to stone. "What?" she whispered. "You approved the work, initiated the planning, hired workers, directed the construction, and knowingly bypassed legal requirements." "No," she choked out. "No, no, no. They helped." She pointed frantically at her board. "They scooted their chairs 2 inches away from her," the attorney continued. "As the individual responsible, you will face the majority of penalties." Karen trembled. How much?" The attorney flipped a page, tentatively, "between $280, 000, and $480, 000. Karen screamed a high-pitched sound that rattled the lights. "That's a house? You expect me to pay a house?" I answered softly. "That's what happens when you dig sewage trenches through other people's homes. This is a conspiracy," she hissed. "A witch hunt, a personal attack. Karen," I said, "you attacked yourself." She grabbed the stack of violation notices and threw them across the room like confetti. Papers scattered everywhere. Officers moved in immediately. "This hearing is rigged," she shrieked. "I am the HOA. I am the community. You can't do this to me." The commissioner calmly replied, "We just did." Karen made one last desperate attempt to storm the podium, but 2 deputies stopped her. She kicked, flailed, and screamed insults as they escorted her out. Her final words echoed down the hallway. "This isn't over. I'll build a bigger pipe, you'll see." The door slammed. Silence settled. Then the commissioner looked at me, exhausted. "Director, I don't know how you dealt with that for as long as you did." I exhaled. "Occupational hazard." The room quietly chuckled, but I wasn't laughing, because something told me Karen wasn't finished, and I was right. Because in the aftermath of the hearing, one of my investigators approached with a nervous look. "Sir, we found something during the test expansion." "What is it?" He handed me a tablet. Another leak. A bigger one? Flowing toward Karen's own backyard. The real twist? Karen's septic system was failing and leaking into the same drainage line she'd illegally expanded. The irony was almost too perfect. And the disaster, far from over. When the hearing ended and Karen was dragged, screaming out of the building by 2 deputies, I thought I had finally earned a day of peace. Just one day, one single, blessed morning, where I could drink my coffee without worrying about heavy machinery tearing through my pasture or sewage bubbling out of places it had no business being. But the universe, like always, had other plans. By early afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was one of my groundwater analysts. His voice was quiet, tense. "Sir, we've confirmed the results. That secondary leak, The big one? It's coming from the HOA side, specifically. He paused. Specifically what? I asked. He exhaled. From the septic system at 142 Birch Hollow Lane? I frowned. Whose address is that? A beat of silence, then Karen's. I sat there in my truck, staring through the windshield at the rolling fields of my ranch. Birds were chirping, wind rustled the grass. Everything was serene until I burst out laughing so hard I had to hold the steering wheel to keep from collapsing. Of course it was Karen's septic system. Of course the woman who illegally laid sewer pipes across my land didn't maintain her own. And of course the failing tank was leaking straight into the illegal system she installed. I wiped my eyes, still laughing. "All right," I said. "Send me the full report by 3:00 p.m. I had it in hand. Photographs, contamination data, a clear visual map showing the flow from her property directly into the trench she'd dug. The leak hadn't started that morning. It had been happening slowly for weeks, maybe months, until her illegal digging accelerated the rupture. She had literally destroyed her own septic system with her own project. I couldn't have written a script more poetic than this. The EPA team assembled on the edge of my property that afternoon. Rivera looked both amused and exhausted. "I guess we're expanding the scope again," she said, flipping through the tablet. "We have to," I replied. "This contamination doesn't stay on my land, it flows downhill." Right into the wetland patch behind her backyard, Rivera gave me a tight smile. The same wetland she argued didn't exist. Exactly. If Karen hadn't already detonated her HOA career during the hearing this morning, this alone would have done it. The team prepared to issue an emergency site inspection at her home. I followed them not because I needed to be there, but because after all the insanity she had caused, I wanted to be present for the final chapter. We approached Birch Hollow Lane in 3 government vehicles. The street was lined with neatly trimmed lawns and homes that looked like they were copy-pasted out of a brochure. And there, at the end of the cul-de-sac, was Karen's house, pink shutters, perfect hedges, a lawn sign that read, "Proud to be HOA President, forever." That aged poorly. We stepped onto the driveway. Rivera knocked firmly. Inside, someone screamed, "I'm not coming out." It was Karen. Her voice cracked like someone fighting off a spiritual exorcism. Rivera knocked again. "Ma'am, this is the Environmental Protection Agency. We need access to your backyard. This is a federally mandated inspection." "No, you can't inspect anything. This is a trick. You're all in on it." "We have probable cause," Rivera said. "Please step aside." "No." A few neighbors peeked out from behind curtains. Others came outside pretending to check their mail, though the mailboxes were empty. Finally, the door flew open, and Karen appeared. Disheveled hair, streaks of mascara, pink blazer wrinkled like she'd slept in it. She looked like she'd just lost a fight with a tornado, and the tornado had won without breaking a sweat. "Listen," she snapped. "I don't care who you think you are. I will not let you step foot on my property." Rivera didn't flinch. "Ma'am, there is contamination leaking from your septic tank into neighboring land. We have documented proof." Karen blinked. "No, there isn't." "There is." "No, there isn't." Rivera motioned to a field agent holding a tablet. He turned the screen toward Karen. The photos were crystal clear. Wet soil, discolored runoff, the unmistakable pattern of septic tank failure. Karen shrieked. "That is photoshopped." The agent stated flatly, "Ma'am, I took these photos personally. I don't care." Rivera closed her eyes briefly, like she was praying for patience. "Ma'am, refusal to allow a legally mandated inspection is obstruction." Karen straightened. "Good. Charge me. I don't respect fake laws." Rivera turned to me. "You want to handle this?" I stepped forward, hands in my pockets, voice perfectly calm. "Karen," she glared. "What? You didn't just violate my rights? Or county law? Or state law? You violated federal environmental regulations. And now, that same system you're so proud of, it's failing." "No, it isn't." "It is." "No, it isn't. It's leaking into a protected wetland." Karen froze like someone had unplugged her brain. "Protected what? Wetland," I repeated. "Remember the thing you said didn't matter and was just swampy dirt." She stared at me, mouth hanging open. I continued, "Not only is your septic system failing, but the contamination is now your responsibility. Not the HOA, not the community. Yours. That's impossible," she whispered. "I'm the HOA president. Not anymore. She visibly flinched as if the words physically hit her. A long silence stretched between us. Her bravado cracked, her shoulders sagged. One of the agents stepped toward the backyard gate. "Ma'am, please move." Karen didn't scream this time. She didn't argue. She simply broke. She stepped aside slowly, arms limp at her sides, expression blank. We entered her backyard. The smell hit first subtle, but unmistakable. The soil around the tank access hatch was saturated. A thin stream trickled downhill toward the illegal pipe trench she dug. Rivera sighed. "Well, that's confirmation." Karen buried her face in her hands. "This can't be happening. This can't be happening." The federal attorney who joined us began dictating notes. "Homeowner is responsible for remediation costs, soil decontamination, tank repair, or replacement," Karen wailed. "Stop. I can't afford any of this," he continued. "Plus daily fines for failure to report the leak." Karen collapsed onto the grass like a puppet whose strings were cut. "This is a nightmare," she whispered. "A conspiracy? You're all doing this to punish me?" I shook my head gently. "Karen, no one had to punish you. You did this all by yourself." She looked up at me with wide, hollow eyes. "Why are you doing this to me?" "Because you buried a sewer system through my ranch," I said. "Because you lied. Because you ignored warnings. Because you endangered your community. Because you refused to take responsibility." She didn't reply. Neighbors gathered at the property line, murmuring. Rivera approached softly. "Ma'am, the official report will be delivered tomorrow. You'll have 14 days to begin remediation." Karen stared blankly. The inspectors finished documenting everything. When we left, she was still sitting in the same spot, silent, defeated, and finally, for the first time since this nightmare began, powerless. As we drove away, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the land. Karen had tried so desperately to control. She wanted to dominate the community. She wanted to intimidate me. She wanted to build something big enough to make herself feel important. Instead, she built the perfect trap and fell right into it. The following week, remediation crews arrived. Specialized contractors repaired my damaged irrigation system. Contaminated soil was removed. My pasture healed. The EPA billed the HOA for some costs, Karen personally for many others. By the end of the month, Karen had sold her house, moved out of the state, and disappeared from the HOA gossip chain entirely. But sometimes, at night, when I look out at the quiet fields of my ranch, I remember the chaos she caused and the peace that followed when she finally faced the consequences of her own actions. Some people learn the easy way. Karen learns the expensive way, and I suspect she always will. Sometimes in life, the loudest people are the ones who listen the least. Karen believed authority was something you could invent, something you could impose on others through sheer force of ego. But real responsibility doesn't work that way. When someone cuts corners, ignores warnings, abuses power, or refuses to respect boundaries, consequences always arrive. Maybe not immediately, but always eventually. This story isn't just about HOA drama or a ruined pasture. It's about how arrogance blinds people, how entitlement makes them reckless, and how the truth, quiet, patient, and stubborn always wins in the end. So if you've ever dealt with a Karen in your life, remember, you don't have to match their chaos, you just have to stand your ground. The universe takes care of the rest. Comment below what city and country you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more wild, real-life HOA stories.